You think reheating your leftovers is just good, thrifty, common sense, something your mother taught you, something that saves money and reduces waste. But in my 35 years treating patients, I have watched a quiet, invisible pattern repeat itself in exam room after exam room, and I need you to hear this clearly tonight. Millions of American seniors are unknowingly feeding tumor cells 3 times a day through a habit so ordinary that no one ever thinks to question it. That spinach you microwaved for the second time, that bowl of rice from 2 nights ago, that leftover pan of mushrooms, that bottle of cooking oil you've reused all week to save a few dollars. None of these foods are dangerous when they're fresh. But the moment we reheat them, especially after the age of 60, when our stomach acid is lower, our liver clears toxins more slowly, and our kidneys can no longer filter out oxidative waste the way they once did, these ordinary foods can quietly transform into something else entirely. I am not here to scare you for the sake of scaring you. I am here because I have seen what happens when this goes unaddressed for years, and I've also seen how remarkably the body responds when we make small, informed corrections. Aging is not a countdown you are powerless against. It is a series of choices, and tonight I am going to walk you through 4 specific foods sitting in your refrigerator right now that deserve a second look. The biochemistry behind why they become harmful when reheated, the real patients whose lives were changed by this exact discovery, and the simple protocol you can start using at your very next meal. Stay with me until the end, because what I'm about to share could be the difference between a kitchen habit that quietly works against you and one that protects the independent, medication-free years you still have every right to enjoy. Before I walk you through these 4 foods, I want you to understand why your body today reacts so differently to reheated food than it did when you were 30 or even 50. In 35 years of internal medicine and cardiovascular research, I have sat across from hundreds of patients whose only crime was trusting a habit that used to be harmless. So let me explain in plain terms exactly what changes inside us after 60 that turns ordinary leftovers into a genuine biological risk. The first shift is in your stomach. Most of us develop what's called hypochlorhydria, a natural decline in stomach acid production as we age. That acid isn't just there for digestion, it's a frontline defense system that neutralizes bacteria and limits certain harmful chemical conversions before they ever reach your bloodstream. When that acid drops, your gut becomes a far more welcoming environment for the very compounds I'm about to describe to you. The second shift happens in your liver. Hepatic clearance. Your liver's ability to filter and break down toxins can decline by 30 to 40% as you move through your 60s and 70s. That means anything toxic that does get through no longer gets cleared out quickly. It lingers, it accumulates, it does slow, cumulative damage, rather than being flushed out the way it would have been decades earlier. And the third shift is in your kidneys, which lose their filtering efficiency with age, making it harder to clear the oxidative byproducts that certain reheated foods generate. This isn't fearmongering. This is basic, well-documented physiology. And it's precisely why researchers at institutions like Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health have spent years studying the link between reprocessed, reheated foods and elevated gastrointestinal cancer risk, specifically in older adults. Your body at 65 is not the same laboratory it was at 35, and the food safety rules you learned growing up were never written with your current physiology in mind. So now that you understand why you're more vulnerable, let me show you exactly which foods in your kitchen deserve your attention tonight, because these are not rare or exotic ingredients. These are the 4 culprits I have seen again and again, sitting quietly in the medical histories of my own patients. Let's start with something that surprises almost every patient I've told this to, because it involves a food we've all been taught is one of the healthiest whole things we can eat: spinach and other nitrate-rich leafy greens like kale, arugula, and collard greens. In their freshly cooked state, these vegetables are genuinely protective. The nitrates they contain support healthy blood flow and cardiovascular function. But here is what almost nobody tells you. When these greens are reheated above roughly 60 degrees Celsius, the natural nitrates within them can convert into compounds called nitrosamines. These are not harmless byproducts. The International Agency for Research on Cancer classifies nitrosamines as Group 2, carcinogens, meaning they are probably carcinogenic to humans, and the research linking them to gastric and colorectal cancer is substantial and growing. Now, remember what I told you a moment ago about reduced stomach acid after 60. That lower acidity creates exactly the kind of environment where nitrate to nitrosamine conversion becomes more efficient, which means the very population most likely to be eating reheated spinach for convenience is also the population least equipped to neutralize what that reheating produces. I think of my patient, Eleanor, 68 years old, a woman who prided herself on meal prepping a large spinach dish every Sunday and reheating a portion of it every single morning for breakfast for nearly 3 years. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an overnight event. It was a slow, cumulative exposure that came up only after we started digging into her gastrointestinal symptoms and her diet history together. Here is your protocol for tonight. Refrigerate any cooked leafy greens within 1 hour of cooking. Consume them cold or at room temperature within 24 hours, and never put them through a second reheating cycle. If you want the nutritional benefit of spinach without the risk, eat it fresh or eat your leftovers cold in a salad rather than warming them back up on the stove. The second food I want you to think about tonight is one that sits in nearly every American kitchen, often in a rice cooker that's been left on warm for hours longer than anyone intended: cooked rice. Here is what most people don't know. Raw rice can carry heat-resistant spores of a bacterium called Bacillus cereus. Cooking your rice the first time does not necessarily destroy these spores, and if that cooked rice is left sitting at room temperature for any length of time, those spores can germinate and begin producing a toxin called cereulide. This is the critical detail I need you to understand. Cereulide is heat stable. That means reheating your rice, even thoroughly, does not neutralize it. You can microwave that rice until it's steaming hot, and the toxin will still be sitting there fully active. In a younger, healthier adult, this typically causes acute vomiting and passes within a day. But in someone over 60, whose hepatic clearance has already declined by 30 to 40%, repeated low-level exposure doesn't just cause a bad afternoon, it places chronic stress on a liver that is already working with a diminished capacity to filter toxins, and over time, that stress accumulates. I think of my patient Walter, 72 years old, who came to me with unexplained fatigue and abnormal liver markers that genuinely puzzled us for weeks. It was only when we walked through his daily routine, meal by meal, that we discovered the pattern. Rice cooked in the evening, left out on the counter for 4 hours while he watched television, then reheated and eaten again the following night. Not once, not twice. This was his standard routine, week after week. Here is your protocol for tonight. Portion your rice into shallow containers immediately after cooking so it cools quickly. Refrigerate it within 1 hour, never leave it at room temperature for more than 2 hours, and never reheat the same batch of rice more than a single time. If it's been sitting longer than that, it belongs in the compost, not on your plate. The third food deserves your full attention, especially if you're one of my patients or one of the millions of Americans currently taking a statin or an ACE inhibitor for blood pressure or cholesterol management, because this is where diet and medication intersect in a way most doctors never take the time to explain: cooked mushrooms. Mushrooms have a delicate protein structure made up of amino acid chains that are far more heat sensitive than the proteins in meat or grains. When mushrooms are cooked once, that structure is already somewhat fragile. When you reheat them a second time, those proteins break down further, and in that breakdown process, they generate compounds that go on to oxidize LDL cholesterol in your bloodstream. Oxidized LDL is far more dangerous than ordinary LDL. It's the form of cholesterol most directly implicated in plaque formation inside your arteries, and it places a measurable additional burden on kidneys that are already working harder than they did in your younger years. Now, here is where it becomes personal for so many of you watching. If you are on a statin, oxidative compounds from reheated mushrooms can interfere with how effectively that medication does its job, and in some cases contribute to elevated muscle enzyme markers, a warning sign of muscle stress that your doctor takes very seriously. If you are on an ACE inhibitor, that added kidney burden compounds a system that medication is already asking a great deal of. I think of my patient, Margaret, 74 years old, on a standard statin regimen, whose routine blood work showed an unexpected rise in creatine kinase, a marker I don't like to see moving in the wrong direction. When we traced back her diet, the pattern became clear. A large mushroom dish, cooked once, reheated for dinner 3 to 4 times a week for months. Here is your protocol for tonight. Cook only the amount of mushrooms you plan to eat in that single sitting, and if you do have leftovers, eat them cold in a salad, for instance, rather than putting them back on the stove or in the microwave. Mushrooms are simply not a food built for a second round of heat. The fourth food is not really a food at all. It's the medium. Almost everything else in your kitchen passes through, and it may be the most overlooked danger of the 4. Reused cooking oil, particularly seed oils that get poured back into the bottle and used for frying again and again, sometimes for an entire week. Here is the biochemistry behind why this matters so much. Every time you heat an oil to a high temperature, you break down its molecular structure a little further. Seed oils, in particular, are rich in polyunsaturated fats, which are chemically unstable under repeated high heat. With each reheating cycle, that oil generates a compound called 4-hydroxynonenal, or 4-HNE, along with acrylamide, and both of these are not minor byproducts to shrug off. Research has directly implicated 4-HNE and acrylamide in the formation of DNA adducts, which are essentially points of damage where these compounds bind directly to your DNA and interfere with its normal structure and repair. Institutions, including the University of Minnesota and the World Health Organization, have documented the connection between this kind of DNA adduct formation and the progression of pancreatic, breast, and colorectal cancers. And remember what I told you earlier, your body's natural DNA repair mechanisms slow down with age, which means damage that your 30-year-old body might have caught and corrected can now accumulate more freely in your 60s and 70s. I think of my patient, Robert, 70 years old, with a family history of colorectal cancer, who told me almost proudly that he never wasted oil, meaning the same bottle of vegetable oil got reused for frying 4 or 5 times a week, month after month, for years. He wasn't being careless. He genuinely believed he was being responsible. Here's your protocol for tonight. Choose extra virgin olive oil or avocado oil for high heat cooking whenever possible, since they hold up better structurally, and no matter which oil you use, discard it after a single high heat use rather than pouring it back into the bottle. That bottle of saved oil sitting by your stove right now is not the frugal choice it appears to be. It's a slow, repeated exposure to compounds your body is less equipped than ever to defend against. Now, let's bring all of this together, because I don't want you walking away from this video overwhelmed with 4 separate rules to memorize. I want you walking away with one simple philosophy that governs your kitchen from tonight forward. Fresh food gets eaten fresh, and leftovers get refrigerated quickly and reheated at most 1 single time. That's it. That's the entire principle underneath everything I've explained tonight. For your spinach and leafy greens, refrigerate within 1 hour, eat cold within 24 hours, and skip the second reheating entirely. For your rice, portion it into shallow containers immediately, refrigerate within that same 1 hour window, and never let it sit at room temperature for more than 2 hours before it goes in the fridge or in the trash. For your mushrooms, cook only what you'll eat that meal, and if there's extra, eat it cold rather than warming it back up. And for your cooking oil, treat every bottle as single use for high heat frying, and reach for olive oil or avocado oil when you can. None of these changes cost you money. None of them require a new supplement, a new medication, or a trip to a specialist. They require nothing more than a slightly different relationship with your own refrigerator and your own stove. I want you to understand something important here. Every single one of these choices is a vote you cast for your own health multiple times a day in a place no doctor is standing beside you to guide you your own kitchen. That is precisely why this matters so much to me. I can adjust your medications in my office. I can order your blood work and catch problems early, but I cannot follow you home and stand next to your stove every night. Tonight, that responsibility belongs to you, and I have full confidence you're capable of carrying it.